Crestwood Academy is located right in the heart of New York, one of the most prestigious high schools in the United States. It is a place where the children of wealthy, powerful families study, receiving the best education with the most modern facilities. At Crestwood, students are not only taught to be smart, but also to look perfect. From custom-made uniforms to designer backpacks sparkling under the sun, everything here exudes luxury and privilege. And in that world, Amara is an outsider. Amara Williams was born and raised in the Bronx, a neighborhood notorious for its poverty and rampant crime. She lives with her mother and younger brother in a small apartment on the fourth floor of an old, run-down building. Her mother, Linda Williams, is a nurse who works tirelessly at the hospital day and night to earn enough money to support her two children. Since she was young, Amara knew she wasn't like the other kids in the neighborhood. While her peers played outside or wandered the streets, she buried herself in books. Mathematics was her greatest passion. Numbers, equations, and mathematical laws gave her a completely different world. A world with order and logic. Nothing chaotic like the life outside. But no matter how smart she was, Amara knew she was playing a game where she was always at a disadvantage. Every morning she had to wake up early, rush to the bus stop to catch the bus to school. Unlike the other students with their personal drivers, she only had a pair of old, worn-out sneakers. Her breakfast was often just a slice of bread with peanut butter, while her classmates sat in fancy restaurants enjoying a full American breakfast with eggs, sausages, and fresh orange juice. She knew she didn't belong here, but she had no other choice. Crestwood was her only chance to escape the life of poverty. The full scholarship she earned was not only a ticket to a top-tier education, but also an opportunity to change her fate. She just had to survive all the disdainful stares, the gossip behind her back, and the loneliness that surrounded her every day. The first day at Crestwood. The moment Amara stepped into the classroom on her first day, the room froze for a few seconds. A black girl, wearing a worn-out uniform with slightly frayed seams, old white sneakers that had turned yellow, and a tattered leather backpack she treasured like a precious artifact. The whole class began whispering. "Oh my God, who is that? Look at that backpack. Is it vintage?" "Vintage? I bet it's second-hand." She, Chloe, the most popular girl in the class, with shiny blonde hair and an expensive jacket draped over her shoulders, smirked and spoke sarcastically. "I bet she got a scholarship from the Poor Student Fund." Laughter erupted from her group. Amara heard it all. She could feel the scrutinizing eyes scanning every inch of her body, as if they were evaluating which class she belonged to, how much she was worth. Her heart raced, but her face remained calm. No reaction, no retort. She walked toward the empty desk at the back of the room and sat down. But just as she placed her bag on the desk, Jason, the son of a financial conglomerate CEO, sitting at the desk next to hers, lifted his chin toward her and said, his tone dripping with contempt, "Hey, are you sure you're in the right school?" The group laughed loudly. Amara clenched her fists under the desk. The feeling of humiliation and anger rose in her chest, but she swallowed it down. She was used to this. She knew that in their eyes, she was just a poor girl who got in here because of pity. They looked at her like a foreign species, an outsider who didn't deserve to exist in their world. But they were wrong. They didn't know that this girl had stayed up all night under the dim light of her small apartment, going through one math book after another. They didn't know that she had to ask her mother to buy her an old computer just so she could study for months. They didn't know that Amara didn't come here to bow her head to anyone. She took a deep breath, opened her book, and focused on the lesson. She blocked out the whispers. She ignored the mocking looks. All she needed was patience. She just needed to prove herself. One day, they would have to look at her with different eyes. From the very first day she stepped into class, Amara felt an invisible wall rising around her. As she entered the classroom, the lively conversations among groups of students suddenly slowed. A few glanced at her before quickly looking away. If she sat down near someone, they would subtly move their chair away, as if maintaining distance was necessary. Amara wasn't naive. She understood. No one wanted to talk to her. No one openly bullied her, but their silence was more terrifying than insults. It was a silent declaration. You don't belong here. That day, the math class was filled with tense silence. On the board, the teacher had written a complex equation. Numbers stacked upon each other, square roots and variables turning it into a tangled maze. No one raised their hand. No one wanted to risk giving the wrong answer in front of the whole class. Amara scanned the room. Jason was tapping his pen against the desk, his eyes lazy as if he couldn't be bothered to think. Chloe was busy adjusting her curls, ignoring the problem as if it had nothing to do with her. The other students exchanged knowing glances, waiting to see who would be foolish enough to answer first. Amara swallowed hard. She had solved the problem in seconds. She knew she was right, and so she raised her hand. As soon as Amara raised her hand, the entire class turned to look at her. The silence only lasted for a split second before laughter erupted from the corner of the room. Jason, who had been lazily tapping his pen on the desk, suddenly leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Oh, the scholarship girl can do math too." Laughter spread like a wave. "Isn't she only good at cleaning the board?" A girl's voice chimed in, followed by more giggles. "Or maybe she thinks solving this will make her a genius," someone whispered. A cold shiver ran down Amara's spine. She had been mocked before, but this time was different. This time, she was standing in front of the entire class. She could feel every single pair of eyes on her. Some were curious, some amused, and others just watching for entertainment. She had a choice. She could sit down and pretend she never raised her hand. Or she could step up and prove them wrong. For a brief moment, she wanted to retreat. Old memories came rushing back. When she was younger, standing in front of her class with trembling hands, mocked just for speaking up. When she was called that dumb black girl in her old school. When those taunting laughs followed her all the way home. They wanted her to be afraid. They wanted her to believe she could never rise above them. She clenched her fists. No, she didn't come this far just to bow her head. Taking a deep breath, Amara stepped up to the board. The classroom fell silent again. The whispers stopped as she picked up the chalk and began writing. Each step of the solution appeared with precision, her calculations smooth and flawless. Amara didn't look at anyone. She didn't need to hear what they had to say. She focused only on the numbers. 3 minutes later, she set the chalk down. The room was dead silent. The teacher nodded, impressed. "Correct. That was an excellent solution, Amara." She walked back to her seat amidst the awkward silence. But just as she sat down, a voice muttered from the back, "She probably just got lucky." Snickers filled the air again. Amara didn't turn around. She kept her eyes forward, but inside a fire was burning. "Laugh all you want. One day, I'll make you all shut up." Lunch was always the worst part of the day. Amara had no assigned table. Every day, she had to find an empty spot in the crowded cafeteria, where anyone could suddenly get up and leave the moment she sat down. That day, as she placed her tray on the table, Chloe spoke up in a slow, sugary voice. "Mara, how do you like Crestwood? Does it feel foreign?" Her voice dripped with fake sweetness, and her group of friends giggled. A boy smirked. "She probably hasn't even been inside a fancy restaurant before." Amara froze. She knew this wasn't just a joke. It was a reminder that she would always be an outsider, a scholarship girl who didn't belong in their privileged world. As she opened the lunch her mother had packed, a simple sandwich and an apple, Chloe suddenly spoke again, loudly enough for the whole cafeteria to hear. "Oh my God, Amara, aren't you embarrassed bringing such basic food? It's kind of sad. Should we all pitch in so she can buy a real meal? Laughter erupted. Amara gripped her chopsticks tightly but said nothing. She refused to respond. But Jason wasn't done. Hey, do you want to try my sushi? Or have you never had it before? Another round of laughter. Amara pressed her lips together, grabbed her apple, and stood up. But the moment she turned, she felt something slippery under her shoe. A smear of mayonnaise. Deliberately spilled. Thud. Her tray crashed to the floor. Her sandwich landed on the dirty tiles, and milk spilled everywhere. Laughter exploded, even louder than before. "Oh no, someone help the scholarship princess clean up," Chloe sneered. Amara's face burned. Not from embarrassment, but from anger. Still, she said nothing. Go ahead and laugh, she thought. Laugh as much as you want. That recess, the entire class was as noisy as ever. Laughter and chatter filled the room as groups of friends gathered to discuss weekend plans, the latest trends, and, of course, the upcoming national math competition. Everyone knew this wasn't just any competition. It was the battleground of the brightest minds, where the best students represented their school to compete against the strongest opponents in the country. And there was no doubt about the names that would appear on the list. Jason, with his straight-A record, was always regarded as the class genius. Chloe, though not particularly exceptional, had the advantage of a wealthy family and top-tier private tutors, securing her a spot with ease. Alongside them were a few other top math students, all belonging to Crestwood's so-called elite. When the teacher walked in, holding the final list in hand, the class fell into an almost breathless silence. The teacher's voice rang out clearly. The students selected for this year's national math competition are Jason, Chloe, Daniel, Marcus. No surprises there. Everyone nodded, affirming the expected names. But then... and Amara. A heavy silence blanketed the room. No one spoke for a few seconds. Some even thought they had misheard. Then suddenly, laughter erupted. "Is this a joke? Amara, in the competition?" A male voice broke out, filled with blatant contempt. Does she even knows anything besides cleaning the board? She's probably just there for fun." The laughter spread throughout the class. Some clapped as if it were a comedy act. Others whispered among themselves, their gazes filled with ridicule. At the front row, Chloe crossed her arms, smirking. "All right then, let's see who comes out on top." Jason chuckled, shaking his head mockingly. Maybe the school wants to try something new, like putting a duck in a horse race. The laughter grew even louder. Through the jeers and condescending looks, Amara remained still. She didn't argue. She didn't get angry. She simply stared straight ahead, her expression unwavering. But inside her, something was burning. They could laugh. They could look down on her. But soon, they would be silenced, because she wasn't competing for fun. She was competing to win. The national math competition was only a week away. Amara didn't have time to waste on insults. She focused entirely on her studies, spending hours in the library, jotting down crucial formulas, and repeatedly solving the hardest problems. But Chloe, Jason, and their group wouldn't leave her alone. They knew the only way to stop her was to shake her confidence before the competition. And so, the pranks began. That afternoon, Amara walked to her locker as usual. She needed her math workbook. She turned the lock, opened the door. Empty. All her books, including the notebook she had spent weeks compiling, were gone. Her heart sank. She searched every compartment, checked every corner, but there was nothing. Behind her, quiet laughter echoed. She turned around. Chloe stood there, arms crossed, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Lost something, Amara? Guess someone thought you wouldn't need your books." Jason stepped up, placing a mock-friendly hand on her shoulder. "Wah, a true genius doesn't need notes, right?" The group burst into laughter. Amara clenched her fists, But she didn't falter. No books. She would rely on her memory. No one could take her intellect away. Without a word, she turned and headed straight for the library. They could play their tricks. She would keep studying, no matter what they did. The next day, Amara arrived at her desk and found a neatly folded paper waiting for her. She picked it up and opened it. Official exam. Internal use. She frowned. Inside was a set of problems far more difficult than any from previous year's tests. From across the room, Chloe watched her, waiting for a reaction. If Amara believed this was the real test and studied accordingly, she would be completely thrown off track. A clever trap. But Amara wasn't so easily fooled. She carefully analyzed each question. Immediately, she spotted small mistakes in the problem design. One question had inconsistent units. A geometry problem contained unnecessary data. Another seemed complex at first glance, but was actually just a simple problem disguised with extra steps. This couldn't possibly be the real test. They were trying to deceive her. From his corner, Jason smirked, expecting her to scramble and take notes. But instead of panicking, Amara calmly folded the paper, tore it into pieces, and tossed it into the trash. Jason's group froze. Chloe's smirk faltered. She wasn't that easy to trick. Amara simply smiled slightly and returned to her studies. One day left until the competition. That afternoon, while Amara was studying in the cafeteria, Chloe suddenly appeared in front of her, holding a fresh glass of orange juice. Her voice dripped with fake sweetness. "You've been studying too hard. Here, have a drink to relax." Amara glanced at the glass. No way. Why was Chloe suddenly being nice? From the nearby table, Jason struggled to suppress a smirk. A few others whispered to each other, watching to see if Amara would drink it. She gently pushed the glass aside. "Thanks, but I'm not thirsty," Chloe pouted, feigning disappointment. "What's wrong? Don't trust us?" Amara didn't reply. But just then, another student, completely unaware, picked up the glass and took a sip. Minutes later, his face turned pale, and he rushed straight to the restroom. Jason's group went silent. Amara simply closed her book and looked directly at them. "Thanks for the offer, but I'm not that easy to fool." Then she stood up and walked away, leaving Jason and Chloe with stunned expressions. They could play all the tricks they wanted. They could steal her books. They could try to mislead her studies. They could attempt to break her spirit. But there was one thing they could not change. Tomorrow, in the real competition, she would be the one to prove them all wrong. The final exam day had arrived. The grand hall of Crestwood Academy gleamed under the glow of elegant chandeliers. Crisp uniforms, confident faces, and eyes filled with anticipation and nervousness. This was more than just an exam. It was a chance to prove oneself in a school where status mattered more than ability. Amara stood at the entrance of the exam room, gripping her pen tightly. A fleeting moment of doubt crossed her mind, but she took a deep breath and reminded herself, "I've worked tirelessly for this day. I'm not here to be afraid." She stepped inside. Immediately, she felt the weight of gazes upon her. Jason, seated right in the middle of the room, leaned back in his chair, smirking as he glanced in her direction. "Look at that! The scholarship girl is actually taking the test," he muttered, just loud enough for his nearby friends to hear. Chloe let out a soft chuckle, pretending to examine her nails. "Well, at least we know we won't be last." Amara heard every word. She could feel the condescension in their voices, but instead of lowering her head as she once might have, she quietly took her seat and placed her hands on the desk. They could laugh all they wanted. It wouldn't affect her exam. As the proctor distributed the test papers, the tension in the room thickened. The sound of shuffling pages filled the air. Amara picked up the exam, took a deep breath, and began reading through the questions. And in that instant, all her worries vanished. These were the types of problems she had studied relentlessly for months, the formulas she had burned into her memory. Her eyes lit up. She picked up her pen and moved swiftly across the paper. Without hesitation, she wrote out her answers in confident, precise strokes. each calculation flawless, every line of reasoning clear. She wasn't paying attention to the others, but they were certainly paying attention to her. Jason stole a glance at Amara early on, expecting to see her struggling, but what he saw instead made him freeze. Amara wasn't panicking. She looked calmer than anyone else in the room. She wasn't flipping back and forth through the test like the other students, nor was she furrowing her brows in frustration. She was writing, quickly, decisively, as if the answers had been waiting in her mind all along. Jason swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably. He returned to his own test, but a nagging unease crept into his chest. Chloe, seated 2 rows away, noticed it too. She glanced at the clock and realized she had wasted too much time on a single question, while Amara had already completed nearly half of the exam. "No way," Chloe muttered, gripping her pen tightly. Time passed. While many students were still stuck on the last few questions, Amara had already finished. She carefully reviewed all her answers, ensuring there were no mistakes, then set her pen down. Her heart pounded. Part of her wanted to wait until the final minutes to avoid drawing attention. But then she remembered the mockery, the sneers, and the reason she had worked so hard all these years. She stood up, picked up her exam, and walked toward the proctor's desk. The room went silent. Jason, Chloe, and several other students paused, watching her with disbelief. No one, not even the top students, had ever finished this quickly. Amara placed her exam on the desk and spoke calmly. "I'm finished." The proctor nodded, taking the paper from her. Without looking back, Amara walked out of the room, knowing full well that behind her, stunned gazes lingered, and smirks had faded into something else entirely. She didn't need to say a word. The results would speak for themselves. As soon as the exam ended, students flooded out of the room, buzzing with chatter about the test. Jason was the first to step out, stretching confidently. "That was easy. I'm definitely ranking at the top." Chloe grinned, nodding in agreement. But the moment she spotted Amara exiting before her, her smile wavered. Her group of friends immediately swarmed around, their voices laced with sarcasm. "Amara, you finished early? Gave up already?" Jason crossed his arms, smirking. "Yeah, no one finishes that fast, unless they just gave up." "Maybe she just guessed all the answers and walked out," another sneered. Laughter rippled through the group as a few students nearby glanced toward Amara with curiosity. But she simply kept her gaze forward, saying nothing. Her calm demeanor only made Chloe more irritated. "Just wait until the scores come out," Chloe huffed, crossing her arms. "Then we'll see who the real genius is." Jason chuckled, nodding. "Yeah, let's wait for the results." 1 week later, the main hall was packed with students. The results of the national math exam had just been posted. The top students, especially Jason and Chloe, eagerly scanned the board, expecting to see their names at the top. Chloe pushed forward first, her eyes quickly searching for the #1 spot. But when she saw the name at the top, she froze. Rank 1, Amara Johnson, 100 points. The entire crowd went silent. No one could say a word. Jason, standing beside Chloe, widened his eyes in disbelief. He immediately scanned the list, searching for his own name. Rank 7, 100 points. Chloe frantically looked for hers. Rank 12, 100 points. Her face turned pale. The murmurs among the students grew louder. "Amara ranked first? A perfect score? She's the only one who got full marks. Where's Jason? Where's Chloe?" Jason clenched his teeth. He couldn't accept this. Chloe tightened her fists, refusing to believe it. This must be luck." Chloe's voice wavered. But just then, a teacher's voice rang out, shattering her last hope. It wasn't luck. Amara's solutions were the most concise and accurate among all the candidates. The examiners even praised her for her outstanding reasoning skills. Jason and Chloe stood frozen. At that moment, all their past mockery suddenly felt embarrassingly foolish. The loudspeakers echoed through the hall. "Congratulations to Amara Johnson, the highest-scoring student in the national math exam." The entire hall erupted in applause. A teacher stepped forward, placing a proud hand on Amara's shoulder. Amara walked onto the stage, calm, composed, and without arrogance. When the announcer asked about her feelings, she simply smiled and said, "People may judge me by my skin color or my background, but no one can deny my intelligence and hard work." The applause grew even louder. Jason and Chloe could only stand there in silence. For the first time, they didn't mock Amara. Not because they suddenly respected her, but because they had nothing left to say. They had lost, not just in the exam, but in their own arrogance. From that day on, no one dared to look down on Amara again. No revenge was needed. No harsh words were necessary. Their silence was Amara's greatest victory.